Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Modern Church History. Welcome, Father.
Thank you. Good to be back, Teresa.
Thank you, Father. It's good to have you here. We have covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah, we really have been. Although it's a relatively short period of time in church history, really only a couple hundred years, and yet it's a tumultuous period of time. A lot of things happening.
There have been a lot of things going on.
Yeah. Well, today what we're going to be doing is pulling some of this all back together again. You know, we've had the popes living in Avignon because it was too dangerous to live in Rome. Remember that through the efforts of St. Catherine of Siena and others, that the papacy was brought back to Rome. The Pope died shortly after that. Gregory XI died shortly after that. There is another conclave that takes place. It's a very controversial conclave, and some of especially the French cardinals, leave Rome, form their own conclave, and elect one of their own, Robert of Geneva, who is nicknamed the Butcher of Cesena, as an anti-pope.
Right.
And, of course, he then takes his entourage. They go back to Avignon, and now you have the Pope in Rome and then this anti-pope in Avignon. He eventually dies, and one of his followers, Pedro de Luna, then becomes the next anti-pope. This is Benedict the 13th, and he lives a very long life. He lives to be about 96 years old. He's a very tenacious character. Probably would have been a good pope if he had been on the right side, and I'm sure that throughout his life he thought he was on the right side.
Right.
At the same time, you have a series of other Roman popes who succeed one after the other. And if you remember last week, we left off with a group of cardinals from both camps meeting in Pisa, electing yet a third pope.
Right.
And so you have the Council of Pisa, which of course was not called by a legitimate pope, so it's an anti-council.
Right.
And then you have an anti-conclave within the anti-council, electing yet another anti-pope, this being Alexander V, who died within a couple weeks after that, and then another one of their number is elected, and he chooses the title John the 23rd,
right,
which is a title that will not be, there will be no more Pope Johns until our present age, when Pope John the 23rd chose that title to bring an end to that period of history.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a good little synopsis.
Yeah, a little running kind of a thing there.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you, the guy that really that brings stability and restoration back to the church is an interesting character. He's the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So it's not going to be a clergyman at all. It's going to be the Emperor, who in many ways is a very strange personality to bring about this case. Now, several times in history, there have been emperors who have acted very positively in helping to reform the church. In this case, here's a man who certainly looked like an emperor, acted like an emperor. He was a tall, powerful man, long yellow hair, a great beard, rosy cheeks, the whole works. He had a beautiful wife, a princess from Austria. They just looked like a real royal couple. This man had saved Europe in 1396 from a Turkish invasion.
Okay.
And so he's credited with having done that. And now he works with both France and England, and they have just finished the 100 Years' War.
Right.
He works with them to bring about this council, and the decision is that it would take place in Constance, in the city of Constance, and all three of those who claimed the title of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, were invited to come to this council. So
why was it held in Constance?
Well, Constance is a really good city. Actually, it's located on Lake Constance, what the Germans refer to as Bodensee. It's a beautiful location. It was founded by Constantine. It's one of the two cities that he founded. The other is Constantinople. So, interestingly enough, he named both of those cities after himself. Mm-hmm. So, it's a very, very ancient city, going back to the 300s. It had also been the mother diocese of many of the dioceses of France and Germany. They looked back to this diocese as being the source of their own growth. It also had a number of monasteries located in the area, the most famous of which is the Abbey of Reichenau. And anyone who's into medieval art, that name would immediately strike a chord, because it's at the Abbey of Reichenau that the calligraphers began introducing illustrations. You see a lot of times medieval manuscripts and the beautiful pictures that are on the side. That is actually started at Reichenau. So it has a wonderful library, and it was just a great location to have a council there. It was also a neutral ground too. And a lot of people were very impressed with the decision. One of those was none other than the Cardinal d'Ailly, who we've seen before is something of a critic of the papacy, although he's a cardinal, and he thought it was an excellent selection of a spot. A number of others the same way. Interestingly enough, the anti-pope John the 23rd, when he arrived, had a totally different picture. As he came up over this rise and looked down into the city that sits on the shore of Lake Constance, he told the people that he was with, he says, "Here is the pit where they catch the foxes."
Oh.
I don't know how he said that, but I have a funny feeling that he said it with a certain amount of remorse, because he was one of those foxes. And so he sort of knew that this council was going to bring an end to this chaos and was going to reestablish order within the church. One of the cardinals was considered as the master of the council, and he calls the council, Cardinal Zabarella calls the council, the first session, to open on November 16th of 1414. So it'll be late in 1414. Interestingly enough, all the important players had not yet arrived. So they started the council, but nothing could be done until the big shots arrived. The day after the council was opened, Cardinal Peter d'Ailly arrives from France, bringing along with him 42 assistants.
Wow.
Isn't that something? So he comes in and quite an entourage.
That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah. When you think about the Second Vatican Council, and most of the Council Fathers brought 1, 2, 3, 4 periti, with them, experts, theological experts. This guy's bringing along 42. If he thought that he was going to cause a splash, it was nothing in comparison to the Archbishop of Mainz when he arrived with an entourage of 500.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that something? And he was outdone, of course, by the emperor, who arrived on Christmas Eve.
Oh, okay.
And just in time for a Mass, celebrating Christmas Eve Mass, midnight Mass, and everybody who was anybody was there for that. I believe the emperor acted as deacon at that Mass also. I don't know that he was a deacon, but anyway, he performed that role. And also he gave, this is the Emperor Sigismund, the emperor gave a sword to John the 23rd, the anti-pope John the 23rd, in order to protect the church. It was a symbolic thing. It was a two-edged sword, and John the 23rd would be one of the victims of that in the end. At this point, then, John the 23rd, acting as pope by virtue of the Council of Pisa, then calls the council obviously he cannot do that, and he knows better. Everyone in his entourage knows better.
Okay.
Because
he's an anti-pope. So
yes.
he can't, okay.
And it's perfectly clear.
Okay.
Even the people who went along with this understood this, but they did it anyway because they didn't know how else to change things. They were getting no cooperation from Pedro de Luna over in Spain, obviously,
okay.
and at the same time, the actual Pope Gregory, the 12th, was staying in Rimini, where he was protected.
Okay.
And by one of the local lords there, and he would not call the consul. He wanted to call his own consul, and so neither of those two would come to the Council of Constance.
Okay.
So what happens is that Sigismund convinces one of the three, an anti-pope, to actually call the consul, which he then does. Well, the very first session goes badly for John the 23rd.
Okay.
And first of all three of them, the council fathers that get together, all of them condemn all three of the popes for being uncooperative.
Okay.
Well, of course, there's only one of the three that happens to be there and that they could get their hands on. Cardinal Dailly calls for a triple session, that is to say, all three of them should retire. Oh. And he convinced a lot of the other cardinals to vote a nice retirement plan for each of them if they would go along with it. They obviously weren't real interested.
Right.
But it's also true as they begin looking at this new council that they had formed, they had to recognize that this Council of Constance is nothing more than a continuation of the Council of Pisa, which obviously was a flawed council.
Right.
It was not called by a legitimate pope. That doesn't stop Cardinal Dailly. You have to understand his idea of ecclesiology is quite different than what we would consider to be orthodox ecclesiology today. He even argues that councils themselves, ecumenical councils, can err.
Okay. And that's not possible for a legitimate council.
That's correct. Okay. Yeah. And so the question comes up, and he's asked the question, then where does infallibility reside in the Catholic Church? And his answer to that is this, and here's a quote: "Only the universal church has the privilege of infallibility." Well, what does that mean?
Right.
When the church gathers in council, isn't that it there? And he said, no, it's only the universal church. What does that mean? And so he's pinned down. He and then another Gerson from the University of Paris, several of the Sorbonne faculty from the University of Paris have the answer. And the answer is the theologians.
Oh.
Yes, yeah. They believed that they alone can critique the bishops and the consuls and the pope.
Okay.
That's a very, very different understanding than what we have as Catholics.
Definitely.
But here you have a number of very influential members of the clergy, cardinals, making the statement. Here's a statement that I came across from the Cardinal of Cambrai. Okay, he was a French cardinal, and he says the following. He says, they, meaning the doctors of theology, of canon lawyers, of civil law, they have a greater doctrinal authority than an ignorant bishop or an abbot who is only titular and without any effective jurisdiction.
Wow.
Yeah. That's quite an assault.
Yes, it is.
This on the Apostolic Church. And no, this comes from the Cardinal of Cambrai.
Oh, Cardinal of Cambrai, okay.
But he is backing up what Dailly has also been arguing. Now, there's another shift that takes place as a result of that. If that's true, then that means that uneducated bishops, the best thing that they would want would be a bishop who is also a theologian. But if they can't have both, they would rather have a theologian than a bishop.
Right.
And bishops who are not well educated almost immediately then have their authority stripped away from them. Certainly at that council, that turns out that most of the support that John the 23rd had were those kind of cardinals.
Okay.
So very, very early on he realized that he was losing out politically at Constance.
Okay.
Well, what happens then is that in February of 1415, the emperor persuades John the 23rd to be the first pope to abdicate. Of the three popes. He says, if you do it, then the others will too. And he really strong-armed him to do this. And so what happened was that John the 23rd then came up with a very carefully worded statement. And we still have that statement with us today. You can look it up in the history books. And what it doesn't do, it doesn't abdicate. He does not abdicate. What he says is, I will abdicate when the others abdicate with me. Okay. Well,
very intelligent man.
Oh yeah. But what happened was the emperor then let the word out that the Pope, of course he's John the 23rd, the anti-Pope, but he lets the word out that there's a great papal statement about to be made, and so everyone comes to the assembly to listen to this. And when John the 23rd begins reading the statement, and it goes along the lines with "I will abdicate," everyone cheered, and they didn't hear the rest of the statement. And then to make it all the more dramatic, if you can imagine, here is this emperor, and I've described him already. He's a big emperor-looking kind of a guy with the flowing beard and the long blonde hair and all. And he rushes forward to John the 23rd, and he kneels at his feet, and he grabs onto his ankles and kisses his feet, thanking him for taking the first step in the reunification of the church. You can imagine John the 23rd going, no, I didn't do this. It was very clever. John thought he was clever. It turns out that Sigismund was much more clever, and the first fox was caught.
Okay. Now, is Sigismund in support of Pope Gregory, the actual Pope, or is he do we know?
Well, no, he is not. What he wants to do is he wants all three to abdicate.
He really did want all three to abdicate.
Yeah, okay. He doesn't know who's Pope.
Okay.
And quite honestly, a lot of people back then didn't either.
Sure.
But he didn't know who's Pope. If he thought that if all three of them would simply abdicate and they would start over again, that they could move on beyond this very unfortunate period of church history. It's only later on we're going to see that the smartest of all of them, even smarter than the emperor and smarter than the theologians, is none other than this old man sitting in Rimini. The Gregory the 12th is going to outsmart everybody in all of this, and as a result of that, save the council. Okay. Because remember, as the council is being formed, as they're writing documents, they're doing so as an anti-council, recognizing that they don't have the legitimacy, but they don't know what else to do. Gregory's going to solve that problem. Let me read for you one of the documents, or part of one of the documents, to show you the force and the power and the fire behind this movement. And it's stilted in a little bit of heavy legal language, but I think it gives you something of a sense of this. And each of the three, the two anti-popes and the Pope, are going to be given a copy of this. And it's called Sacrosancta, and it is promulgated on April 6th of 1415. This is what it says. This Holy Synod of Constance, constituting a general council and lawfully assembled to root out the present schism and to bring about the reform of the church in head and member. They have to be saying that with a certain amount of blushing because they know that's not true. But anyway, they go on. Declares that by that being lawfully assembled in the Holy Spirit, constituting a general council and representing the Catholic Church militant, it holds power immediately from Christ, and that anyone of whatsoever state or dignity, even the papal, is bound to obey it in matters which pertain to the faith, the rooting out of the said schism, and the general reform of the church in head and member. Further, it declares that any person of whatsoever rank, state, or dignity, even, they're really driving that in, who contemptuously refuses to obey the mandates, statutes, ordinances, or instructions made or to be made by this Holy Synod or by any other general council lawfully assembled concerning the aforementioned or matters pertaining to them shall, unless they repent, be subjected to fitting penance and duly punished, recourse being had, if necessary, to other sanctions of the law.
All right.
That lays down the law there. Well, that's the kind of attitude that's beginning to bubble up at Constance, which really made John the 23rd very nervous, because now John the 23rd is no longer John the 23rd. He is Balthasar Cosa. Okay. He's been reduced to the ranks of where he had been before. In fact, there's a committee that's set up within the council to consider indicting him on crimes against the church.
Wow.
Yeah. An English bishop, the Bishop of Salisbury, even goes so far as to say that in his opinion, John, now Balthasar Cosa, has done such disservice to the church that he would be heretical and therefore should be burned at the stake.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Well, you can imagine things are getting a little tight and a little hot for Balthasar Cosa, the former John the 23rd. And so while everyone else was involved in a little bit of extracurricular activity, there was a joust going on one day. Everyone was taking a little break and going to the joust. He and a few other supporters of his snuck out of Constance. They made their way to Germany, and which is right on the other side of the lake, and they continued going to a small village with a castle called Schaffhausen, and there they received a welcome and protection at the behest of Duke Ferdinand of Austria. So this is a pretty powerful guy himself. Sigismund, when he found out what had happened, became so incensed he couldn't get his hands on Balthasar Cosa now. Okay, he was away, but he couldn't punish him, but he could punish Duke Frederick. It's Duke Frederick of Austria.
Oh, okay.
And what he did was he hounded him so badly that by the end of his life, Duke Frederick of Austria was nicknamed Duke Frederick the Empty Purse.
Ooh.
The guy was poverty-stricken for what he had done. Well, back in Constance, now remember that Balthasar Cosa, the former John the 23rd, is just sort of sitting up in this little castle. Eventually he'll make his way to another castle, the famous castle at Heidelberg. You see that all the time over above the Neckar River and all in the city itself. He lived there for 3 years. But anyway, back in Constance, the Council Fathers met together during the 10th session in May of 1415, and they formally deposed John the 23rd. Okay, remember he had abdicated prior to this, but now he was deposed. And he's, of course, living up in Heidelberg during this time, and they couldn't get hold of him, and he had no influence on the council anymore. Interestingly enough, an admirer of his, a man by the name of Cosimo de' Medici, the famous de' Medici family, sent 30,000 florians to Heidelberg to buy Balthasar Cosa.
Okay.
And with that, he was transported from there down to Florence, where he was given a nice villa to live for the remainder of his life.
Wow.
And just to wrap this up, what happened to him, remember Pedro de Luna was poisoned but barely survived and then ultimately died in his 90s. What happened with Balthasar Cosa was that he, when the council eventually became a conclave and elected the next pope, a legitimate pope, Martin V, he sent word to Martin V swearing his allegiance to him as pope, and Martin forgave him his sins.
Oh, okay.
And with that, he was given a titular title as a cardinal bishop, and remained the rest of his life basically in Florence, in exile, in retirement. And on the 22nd of December of 1419, he quietly died. And his body was transported to the baptistry at the Cathedral of Florence, where it is today.
Huh. Okay.
So, all's well that ends well.
Yes.
Yeah. At the same time that all of these shenanigans are going on, over in Rimini, one of the cardinals is making a visit to Pope Gregory and asking him to abdicate. And of course, he won't go along with that. But there's a dialogue that's entered between the Council Fathers in Constance and the Pope in Rimini. He condemns the council as an anti-council, which it was. He criticized the Pope. He criticized the Emperor.
Okay.
About Sigismund. He once made the statement. He said, "We should expect more from the King of the Romans." That's enough. Yeah, admonishment.
Yeah.
Eventually, the question came so that Gregory was willing to abdicate. But he said, "I'll only do it if I can do it my way." And they thought, well, okay, fine, this is great. We're going to have a second pope that'll step down. You know, we can't deal with Pedro de Luna. He won't talk reason, and he's in his 90s. But remember that Gregory the 12th is 89 years old himself.
Right.
You know, and so he says, "I will do this. I will abdicate." And of course, Cardinal Dailly was excited about this, and Gerson and all the Sorbonne theologians and all that. This is, you know, they eagerly went along with it. Okay. But the deal was this, that he would only abdicate if he could call the Council of Constance. Well, they thought, well, so what? He's an old man, and, you know, let him have it. Okay, fine. He didn't even go to Constance. He simply wrote a letter saying, "I convene a council in Constance," and, you know, and that was it. This is how brilliant Gregory was in doing this, because by doing that, by him calling the council, first of all, he makes the council legitimate.
Yes.
It had been illegitimate until then, but
right.
it is the first opportunity. It's the only opportunity the church has had now to repair the schism. And he realizes the importance of this council. You can't send these guys home and then reconvene. You're going to have to use this council. So what he does is he legitimately calls a legitimate council because he's the legitimate pope. Okay, all things are set aright. The other thing that he does is, by calling the council when he did, he negates everything that the council has done up until that time.
That's what I wondered.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wondered how that was resolved, the letter you had read. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Sacrosancta really now carries no documentary strength. It is not a council document because the council at that point was not actually a council. It wasn't a legitimate council.
So this council is illegitimate and legitimate.
Yeah.
Constant is, okay. Prior to which time is it, I guess? When is it that it is legitimately called?
Well, it's legitimate. We all ought to remember this date. It's an easy one for us Americans. It was on July 4th that the council was called, and of course the year is 1415, but it's on July 4th that the council was reconvened, this time with a new consul general, a new master of the council, and that's Cardinal John Dominicki. Now, it's Cardinal Dominicki who had been negotiating with Pope Gregory over the way in which this council. Dominicki understood entirely well what Pope Gregory was doing by abdicating in the way that he would abdicate, and of course he was more than happy to have this happen. So now, after July 4th, now you have a legitimate council that continues on then. Okay. So now what do we have? We have a legitimate council. Starting afresh, we have Pedro de Luna over in Pensacola in Spain, still holding out, still saying, "No, I'm the Pope, I'm the Pope," and the Avignon Pope is gone. I'm sorry, he's in Spain.
Right, he's right.
Yeah. So we have one anti-pope, we have one legitimate council. That council then convenes itself as a conclave to elect a pope. Okay. And this will be on November 11th of 1415, and they elect an Italian with the strange name of Otto, but it happens. But Otto Colonna is elected pope. Now, this is an interesting event that he would be elected pope, because he was one of those bishops who was a supporter of Balthasar Cosa, the anti-Pope John the 23rd. You know, and so the council is not even electing someone who would have favored or been favored by Pope Gregory. Okay, But anyway, they elect him. The other thing that is really strange about this election of this particular man is that he's a member of the Colonna family.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember about 200 years earlier, 150, 200 years earlier, there was another Colonna, Sciarra Colonna, who had joined up with the French in order to kidnap and ultimately lead to the death of Pope Boniface VIII.
Right. Okay.
And so here we have 5 generations later, from this family that had produced a pope killer, now we have a pope. It's just absolutely incredible that the transformation of it says an awful lot about the Colonna family.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that it can produce. And he takes the title Martin V. And Martin V is going to be a very dynamic pope.
Okay.
He's going to know exactly what Gregory had done, why he had done it, and then he's going to use that to the advantage of restoring the unity within the church.
Okay.
It's really incredible. The other thing that got people thinking about it was that there was a prophecy back in the Middle Ages. It's called the prophecy of St. Malachy.
Okay.
I don't know if we've ever talked about that here.
I don't think so.
But it's really fascinating. St. Malachy lived in the 12th century from Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
He had gone to Rome to visit the Pope, Pope Innocent II, and present to him a report on the church in Ireland, particularly in the Diocese of Armagh, where he was the bishop there.
Okay.
Remember that Armagh is the Diocese of St. Patrick.
Ah, okay.
So here's St. Malachi. He's a very good friend of St. Bernard of Clairvaux. So,
okay.
We're throwing a lot of saint names around
We
here.
are here.
But remember, this is also the 12th century, too.
Right, right.
12th and 13th century.
So we were...
Yeah. And what happened was that while he was in Rome, he went into a trance, into a mystical trance. And there are 2 versions of what happened here. But if you take the predictions or prophecies on their surface value, what happened was that in the middle of this trance, he began dictating, and a monk wrote down a list, and it was a list. It was a very enigmatic list of descriptions, one right after another. And in these descriptions, later on when he came out of the trance, he took a copy of this, or he took the copy, to the Pope, Pope Innocent II, and presented it to him, describing the papacy in the future.
Oh.
In other words, he predicted the popes of the future based upon this list, both popes and anti-popes.
Wow.
And it's a list of 100 and something names. It's really quite incredible. And anyway, the interesting thing that got people talking about this later on, because you see the list was lost, and it wasn't discovered again until the 1600s in Rome. So they didn't know about this here at this point, but later on, people looking back, as they try to put together the list and compare it with the actual popes, they come across Martin V, and the phrase that St. Malachi had given to this pope was columna veli aureae, which translates the column veiled in gold. Well, that doesn't make any sense, except for, remember, his name is Colonna, which parallels columna, column. And so people look at that, oh my goodness gracious, But at the time, what was much more important at the time of his election was the feeling on the part of so many council members that really was summed up in one of the great philosophers of the day who was there at the council. And this is Nicholas of Cusa. And he makes this statement, and it's a good one. I think it would be good for us to use as a motto from time to time, too. He says this. He says, man has not to reform religion, but religion has to reform man.
Yes.
And he reminds the Council Fathers that as they gather, that it's not for them to reform the Catholic Church, to reform religion, but rather to come back to the truth and let it reform them.
Yes.
That's a very wise statement for any age.
Definitely.
A number of other things are done. There are a couple other documents that are promulgated and things of that nature. But the long and short of it is that by April of 1418, the council then is brought to an end by Pope Martin V.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, that's not the end of the story.
Oh.
Because Martin couldn't go to Rome.
Oh, okay.
Italy was a mess.
Oh, not again.
Yes, again. Yeah. All over Italy, there were condottieri armies. These are those mercenary armies fighting all over the place. It was too dangerous for him to go to Rome. What happens instead is the church begins its own internal reformation. You know, once the council is closed, and once there's a clear leadership of a pope, and we'll see a little bit later on what a tremendous man this Martin V was. People looked back to him. People looked to the church again, the unified church. They ignored Pedro de Luna. You know, he wasn't much more to live, and he had no following anyway to speak of. Now the church was reformed again, and interestingly enough, monasteries began filling. There were new vocations like you wouldn't believe. In Austria and Bavaria alone, there were 50 Benedictine monasteries that were reformed in a matter of a couple years.
Wow.
And just incredible. The Augustinians, their numbers just filled, and they began doing work again, began teaching in universities and schools, and just doing all kinds of stuff. Those two orders were just basically dead in the water, you know. The Dominicans, again, began to spread once again, began getting out there and preaching, and one of the tools that they really popularized now, and this is in the mid-1400s, is the rosary. The devotion to the rosary had been with us for a long time before, but they're really popularized, and especially a lot of it associates this tremendous devotion to the rosary associates itself with the University of Bologna. Now that's an important university because in the Middle Ages that was the university that you went to study law. You went from all over Europe to study law there. It's one of the great universities of Europe, and one of the key individuals who is just really charging this is a very old man by the name of Raymond of Capila.
Okay.
Now Raymond of Capila, if we remember back several sessions ago, is the confessor of St. Catherine of Siena.
Oh, okay.
Remember when she goes to Avignon, he had to go with her as translator because she didn't speak anything but a form of Tuscan Italian. And so this is Raymond of Capua, who later, of course, is beatified.
Right.
Blessed Raymond. The Franciscans, same thing. Lots of enthusiasm, lots of vocations. They produce a number of saints at this time. For instance, Bernardine of Siena comes to the Franciscans and gives his life. This is a time of St. John of Capistrano, also coming to the Franciscans and giving his life, even going to Crusades, joining the Crusades. It's St. John of Capistrano, more than anybody else, that saved the city of Belgrade when it was surrounded by Ottoman, Turkish, Muslim forces, and he rallied the Christian knights to defend, Greek Orthodox Christians, and then later on also went up into Bohemia and tried to convince those who followed John Huss to come back to the Catholic Church. So he has an illustrious career also. Now these are the ones; those are the names that pop out. They're in our hagiography, our lists of saints. But then there's so many others all over Europe. Hospitals were founded. These are all Catholic hospitals were founded. There were leper houses. Hostelries were set up so that travelers would be able to stay in safe places overnight. Orphanages were set up. The world experienced its first bestseller, The Imitation of Christ.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that thing just really took off and became the devotional book. And around this time, you begin having a lot of experiments with the printing press. And so ultimately, the printing press, as it's began churning out in the late, Well, in the 1400s, with the Renaissance taking place, it's going to be churning out a lot of stuff, but a lot of books. But the two bestsellers are going to be the Bible and the Imitation of Christ.
Wow.
And then right after that are going to be playing cards, and then after that everything else, all kinds of other books. But yeah, that'll have a prominent position.
We're in 15th century now, so
The 1400s, 15th century.
right.
That's right.
What was the impetus for all of this?
It is the reform of the church.
For the church,
Yeah.
from all of the turmoil that had been going on.
That's right. Yeah,
it's been settled now, and
yes, and there's a strong sense. Once again, there's
pride and restoration.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of times things happen. I'm convinced of this in church history that we don't necessarily see it as we're living through it, but we look back later on. Another generation will look back and go, "Wow, look what that council did. Look at the fruits of that council." It's just a little editorial comment, but I think we'll find the same thing with the Second Vatican Council. When you look at the Second Vatican Council and all those incredible documents that came out of that, and then to see that same council embodied in the pontificate of John Paul II. Now, that seems like an incredible long period of time, once 30, 40, 50 years, but in the life of the church, it's just a moment. And so we don't know yet the fruits of this council. And certainly the Council of Constance the same way. People didn't consciously realize that this council would cause this explosion of devotion and vocations. But it happened.
Okay.
It's like the Spirit moving, the Holy Spirit moving in the church to bring that about.
All right.
Yeah. At the same time, we weren't ready for the Perusia yet. The church had some real problems, and one of the problems was, I'm sorry to say it as a diocesan priest, but the secular clergy. By and large, the secular clergy did not reform.
Okay.
While you had religious orders that were reforming right and left, secular clergy pretty much went around living the same kind of lives that they had done in the past. That includes bishops, cardinals, and even some popes. As we get into the Renaissance, we're going to look at some of these popes and go, my word, what was going on in your mind? Or moreover, what was going on in your soul? But and that's going to cause some real problems. There are a number of bishops, cardinals, popes, who take those positions because of the benefits that come from that, not out of vocation, and a lot of them are younger, noble children who didn't have a chance to inherit the property, and so they go to serve the church, but not to. Another problem that the church is going to have at this time is going to be the influx of how can I say this? They're humanists, but at the same, and that's wonderful. Christian humanists are wonderful, but there are also a good number of people who would like to call themselves humanists who, at the same time, are not particularly Christian. And unfortunately, the church had a lot of them working within the church itself. You'll have some popes that'll hire speechwriters, letter writers, secretaries that will, in fact, be anything but Christian. One of the best examples of that is a young man from Italy who goes to Constance as a young man, as a scribe, as a young man, and just has a great opportunity to take advantage of the church. His name is Poggio Bracciolini. And what he does is he gets to Constance as a secretary. He goes from monastery to monastery, literally ripping off all their classical literature, stealing cartloads of the stuff. And the monks, honestly, who were there, I don't think they really realized what they were giving up. And he had a way with it. He, a good way of finessing and stuff, and he gets away with a lot of this, but he really ran afoul of Martin V because at the time of Martin V's coronation, he succeeded in getting a number of other young scribes to pull off a deal where they got a significant amount of power over some papal advocates. I don't want to go into all the details of it, but the long and short of it was Poggio really got the eye of the Pope in a way that you would not want to get the eye of the Pope. And he had the mark put on him after that. He never again had access directly to the Pope. But after that, he continued working on other various offices. And the reason for this was that he was just an incredible writer.
Okay.
And he knew Latin grammar and was able to write with such beauty and force that they just couldn't get rid of the guy. You know, in letters, in bulls, in even homilies, in speeches for the Pope and for his entourage, Poggio continued writing these things. But this is a man who had no religion himself.
Wow.
In fact, he and another group of, when they eventually made their way to Rome, he and another group of these humanists would get together on a weekly basis, and they formed an organization that they called the Forge of Lies, where they would tell tales about their bosses, and it was just scandalous stuff. And it was just made up. It was lies, and they shared with each other these lies about this cardinal and that bishop and this pope and all this kind of stuff. And it was just bitter satire from people who obviously did not love the church, but drew a salary from the church.
Wow.
And Poggio ends up having these things published. They ridiculed everything about religion, about the existence of God, everything Catholic, and just lampooned everything. You know, Erasmus, we'll talk about him a little bit later on. He used satire, and especially his book In Praise of Folly, in order to help reform the church and move the church forward. These guys just did it to tear the church down, and certainly, you know, he's probably the best example of that. When Martin V was finally able to get to Rome, he did a number of reforms, but the one reform that he's probably most famous for and found to be most important was that as he looked over the whole history of the schism, he was looking for what is it that caused this, what is it that kept this thing going, that kept us from solving this problem, and his answer was, it's the cardinals. Okay. It's the cardinals. They were trying to hold power for themselves, and they were trying to negotiate back and forth and horse trade and that sort of stuff. And he started taking a look, and he found that all of the popes and anti-popes throughout the whole period of this schism had created 201 cardinals.
Oh, okay.
Now, most of them were dead by then, but still 28 of them were living in Constance, were there at Constance, 28 of them. And so at Constance, one of the things they did was they set a limit on the number of cardinals there would be. And the decision was that there would be 24, and they would have to be qualified to be cardinals. Okay. And that they would be divided up into what was known as nations. That there would be so many from France, so many from England, so many from Germany, so many from Italy, so many from Spain.
Okay.
So that was the decision that was then handed over to Martin V. And what Martin V did then was he simply didn't appoint anybody. For the next 6 years, he appointed nobody. And so simply through attrition, cardinals began dying off so that there was a smaller number of cardinals. And at the same time, he also moved toward crushing their own independence so that they couldn't operate independently. They had to operate as a college of cardinals in conjunction with the Pope.
Okay.
You know, and so this is another thing that he did. He's an iron-willed man. I mean, really strong. It took him 2 years before he could go to Rome.
I was going to ask you where he was.
He went around. He didn't have a place.
Okay.
Now that's the interesting thing, because several cities offered him permanent residence. You know, come, Holy Father, we'll take care of you. You can stay here. This will be your place. Basel in Switzerland offered him. Mainz in Germany offered him. That's a wonderful location. Strasbourg, which is a beautiful location on the Rhine River also. Even Avignon.
Oh, yes.
I don't know how you say in Latin ain't no way, buddy. But there was no way he was going to go back to Rome.
Yeah.
Well, he gets down to Rome after the 2 years, and when he, even in the midst of all of that, people kept on saying, "Oh, don't worry about this, do something else." But he said the following, and this is a quote from Martin V. While he is living, going from place to place, not having a place to call home, he said this. He said, "My duty is to return to Rome. The city is suffering from the absence of its sovereign. The Roman Church is the mother of all the rest. There and there alone the Pope is at his post, like a pilot at the helm." Wow. If you had that kind of a vision throughout the last 100 years,
right,
you wouldn't have had the problems that they had. But as I say, he had a hard time getting there.
Right.
It took 2 years to clear out the condottieri, the noble families in Rome. There was still, you have to, if you think about this, this fighting that goes on among these noble families is like the warlords in Afghanistan. It's just a dangerous place to be, And then on top of all of that, there's a group of Roman citizens that want to form together a commune, which is basically a medieval form of communism. Okay. So, this is a Wild West kind of a place, besides all the different cities having wars with each other. Well, finally, in 1420, Pope Martin V had his chance to return. It was chancy. And he crossed over the Alps. And when he crossed over the Alps, he didn't know that he'd be killed or not. But as he crossed over the Alps, all the people of Italy rose up and said, "The father of his country has returned." Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Not only that, but an army from Naples marched out of Naples up to Rome to clear the path for him so that Rome would be stable. He comes in. The Romans widely received him again. All the worst scenarios turned out to be not true after all. And so the end result is that at the end of all of this, through the Council of Constance, through the pontificate of Martin V, is that the Roman Church is restored, the city of Rome is restored, and there's a firm foundation. It's a question now of whether his successors will take advantage of that and build once again a holy church. And it gets off to a good start. Eugenius, the fourth, is the next pope, and he moves in that direction. Lots of reconciliation, lots of building. The Council of Basel is sort of a dead council. Nothing much happens with it. And after that, the conciliar movement of calling councils on a regular basis kind of goes by the wayside. Unfortunately, what happens then is that you have a whole series of popes who are more interested in the Renaissance and in the arts and in being patrons to the great figures of the Renaissance, of architecture and all that. And so they squander what little treasury there is, money-wise, in the papacy on those things, rather than serving the universal church, and at the same time taxing the universal church in order to continue that all the more. And then the moral authority of the papacy also finds itself at one of its lowest centers. That will set us up for the Protestant Reformation. So there it is.
Well, we've gotten back to home now.
Yes, we've gotten back home.
We've got a good priest or pope in, and things are sounding beautiful right now. Anyway, we see what's coming down the road.
Well, the challenges will still be there, and human frailty and concupiscence still is with us. But the church is But the church is institutionally probably in better shape now in this time period in the 1420s, 1430s than it had been. Certainly grassroots wise, there's so many people were so involved with their church. So many vocations, the devotion to the Rosary, devotion to the Blessed Virgin. So much of this was going on that this is really a religious renaissance that's taking place after the Council of Constance during the pontificate of Martin V.
Great.
So,
Thank you very much, Father. It's a wonderful show. And we close with a prayer for today.
Divine Father, you are the source of all blessings, and so we turn to you and ask you to shower your blessings upon us. We ask you to shower your blessings upon all those who listen to and those who support this radio station and Covenant Network. We ask you to continue in the words of the psalmist to prosper the work of our hands, O Lord. Prosper the work of our hands. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, a world without end. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.